Very interesting. Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Penny Wright. We're really pleased to have Dr. Allen Fein here with us this evening. He has been a member of this community, he and his wife Beverly, for just under 20 years. Richard.
1995.
Oh, so actually 22 years. And originally from Canada, he trained at McGill. He also attended the New York Military Academy. And he has been delivering compassionate care here in the East End of Long Island. And has had over 10 years of experience helping patients who suffer from addiction. Dr. Fein is on the medical staff of the Southampton Hospital and Stony Brook, and he's a fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians. I believe he is also a very fine amateur pianist. Am I right? Are you still playing the piano?
And a baker.
And a music lover and a baker. So we're grateful to him for making time to come and talk to us about a very important subject. Please welcome Dr. Allen Fein.
Well, let's see, about 11 years ago, Dr. Skilbred, the orthopedist, stopped me in the parking lot outside Southampton Hospital, and he said, hey, there's a new treatment for opioid addicts that you could do in your office called Suboxone. And I looked at him and I said, are you crazy? I don't want addicts in my office. And a year later, I realized drug addicts are already in our office, and we're the ones prescribing the medications, and it's pretty expensive to be a drug addict, and there might be some people who are addicts in the Hamptons. You know, I just never had encountered an overt addict in the Hamptons. In fact, when I trained, I don't remember any lectures on opioid addiction. I worked emergency room part-time for my first 8 years. I never had one patient with an overdose. I was a coroner, a medical examiner, and I had 500 cases, deaths. Not one was overdose from heroin. So the first slide is, let's see how we do this. And as I talk to the doctors, it's to change the paradigm. When I was at military school, we'd take the bus through Harlem and we see all these minorities on street corners, and we'd say, oh, those are the heroin addicts. And that was it, you know, now I realize there were probably opioid addicts in Manhattan, and they were just getting their drugs from their doctors and not having to stand on street corners. And so it's not just a thing for them and the minorities. I can guarantee you after 10 years, it's in this community in an epidemic way. One of my patients who's working with one of the ambulance people said they have an overdose every night. About a month ago in Hampton Bays, somebody said there were 3 in Hampton Bays that week. So it's a huge problem. And the cost of buying heroin is so cheap now. It's $5 a bag, which is pretty cheap. Unfortunately, physicians, and when they think of an addict, they always think it's the worst kind of person who comes to the emergency room scamming them at 3 in the morning. Well, my patients don't do that. People who go to the emergency room don't even have $10 in their pocket to buy something from a friend. And that 1% maybe end up in the emergency room, and those are the ones that the doctors think are addicts. So after Dr. Skilbred, a year later, I went and did the training online to become a Suboxone prescriber. And there's still such a stigma of physicians treating patients that 80% of the doctors who get the license to treat addiction do not write one script. So 20% of us are writing the scripts. And the common reason is, well, I can do it, I'm a solo doctor. if I were in a group, I'd have to sell this to all the other members of the group, and everybody could veto it because they don't want to be on call when John comes in withdrawal. They're uncomfortable with it. So there's a real need for more doctors to do this. So next one is, I tell the doctors, prepare yourself for a professional patient. Well, the patients who have opioid use, they are professional patients, and they scam us and they scam their relatives and con them out of money and everything. They are professional patients. They know what buttons to push. They're very hard. It's a lifelong condition. It's not something that they get over within 3 years. 90% of people who go in for these fast detox programs, they're relapsing within a month. It might be 3 years later. It might be when they go to a dentist 4 years later, and the dentist gives them a little bit of an opioid. In the past, heroin, morphine, and cocaine were actually over the counter. And I have a comment here about the community is not well informed by the ME. When I was an ME in Canada, every death was public. The reports were all public. When one of my patients passed away, I assume from an overdose, I could not get the death certificate, anything. I couldn't get anything. The family suppressed it. In New York, if your son dies of an overdose, you can keep it confidential. So the community doesn't get a sense of how serious this problem is. It was about a few weeks ago, the ME's office finally came out and said there were 500 deaths on Long Island in a year from opioid overdose. So that's 10 a week. And one of my patients had a friend who was a grave digger, and he said they were burying a kid a week. If that kind of news made it into the newspaper, people would have no illusion. Okay. So definitions, opiate comes from opium poppy. Opioid is anything, synthetic or natural. Ultram, that's a opioid-like drug. So in 1970, the word narcotic came out, and it defined controlled substances, opioids, cocaine, I think marijuana. This is what addiction is. The difference between addiction and dependency. Most people who are given opioids long enough will have a dependency form. All that means is if they stop taking the opioid, they'll have a withdrawal. It's like you can be dependent on coffee. If you stop coffee, you'll get a caffeine withdrawal headache. So it's not a bad thing. It's just you don't die from going off opioids. Tolerance, another word you'll hear, simply means you need more of the same medication to do the same effect. And that's part of using the medication a long time. It's not necessarily a bad thing unless you run into side effects. Whereas addiction is continuing to use a medication even though it's harming you, obtaining it from different sources, from the street. It has a behavior aspect where you're compelled to take it even though you know it's really bad for you. Lying to your doctor, that's addiction. So opioid use disorder is the new way of saying addiction, because addiction is pejorative, and the new way doctors call diagnosis is now called opioid use disorder. So it's less blaming of the patients. You can see interpersonal relationships, losing your job. So there's the new opioid use definition. So we don't like to use bad words. Speaking of bad words, one of my successful patients recently started on Vivitrol for alcohol, and it's also used for opioid. He came for a shot, and I said, by the way, any doctor can give you this shot. It doesn't have to be a addiction medicine doctor. Why didn't you discuss it with your own physician? And he said, yes, he did. And the physician said, he doesn't treat drunks. It's terrible. Anyway, so we don't like the word drunk, we don't like the word addict, opioid use disorder. So we don't like substance abuse. We don't like to say their urine is dirty. Don't want to play the blame game. So there's other problems with people who have an opioid abuse, and that's because of the injection. Plenty of hepatitis B and C, HIV, MRSA. One of my patients had a huge MRSA abscess from the injection. Respiratory arrest, huge increase for that. Rigid chest syndrome, you shoot the injection, especially of fentanyl, and within seconds the chest gets rigid, so you can't breathe. That doesn't respond to Narcan. Accidental death. Now the big cause of death now is people who are using heroin. It's not heroin, it's fentanyl. Fentanyl is the same chemical that's in the Duragesic patch. It looks the same as heroin. Last year, one of my patients had the fentanyl, overdosed. His mother saved him with Narcan. 3 days later, he did it again. And she saved him again. When patients hear that a dealer is selling a drug that kills people, the dealer becomes very popular because the dealer sells the real thing, a real good drug. And the patients who use this stuff, they figure they'll be smart, they'll just use less. So obviously we're losing. And since I also mentioned fentanyl, a real curse now going on in the community is fentanyl, besides being substituted for the more expensive to produce heroin, they're using fentanyl in pills that people think they're buying Xanax or another pill like a Percocet, and it's cheaper for the drug manufacturer to use fentanyl instead of Xanax, you know. So red flags, if you're worried a loved one might have an opioid problem, these are the red flags. I think the bottom one is a very key one. What does it mean if the pupils are too large or too small? If you're at a Christmas party and little Johnny's all edgy and pale, and his pupils are dilated, and he's cranky, and he disappears for 10 minutes and comes back, his color is good, his pupils are normal, he just did heroin or something, he did an opioid. So vacation time, if one of your friends has dilated pupils, that's the easiest one to see. Sneezing, goosebumps, diarrhea. Red flags. If your son has urine bottles in his bedroom, that is a red flag. Do you know why people save urine? They sell it to their friends for drug screens. Okay, I don't go into the bathroom with my patients, so they could. One guy gave me urine, and my urine cup has a thermometer on it, and I said, well, we better call the ambulance. This is your urine. Yeah, it's 104 degrees. So that I've heard from parents. Their kids have urine. There's no reason your kid should store urine it's a huge red flag. Too flattering. Okay, that's red flags. Assume there's a problem. This is another story of a man told me his 30-year-old daughter, they think, was back on heroin because she's had a couple car accidents in the last month, that she used to be a heroin addict. So I said, she's got to be, and she should get her in for care. And a month later, I said, what happened? She said she died. Overdose. So there was a red flag. So a new tool that came out to help doctors fight this is when a doctor prescribes a controlled medication, we have to use something called an eye stop. So if you're worried that somebody might be getting medications from different places, you can hint to the doctor to run an eye stop on his patient. So it's easily thwarted. Somebody might have an ID card that has a different birthday. They'll go to a pharmacy, CVS for one lot, and Rite Aid for another one, or they'll go out of state. There's ways of gaming it. This is the mu receptor is the one that the heroin hits to make us feel good. So buprenorphine and methadone act on the mu. So heroin is a semi-synthetic drug. So you've got opium, so it has to be harvested, and then they acetylate it. So it's a lot of work, which is making this new fentanyl thing very attractive, cheaper. Methadone is cheaper too, but methadone doesn't give you a nice high. So one bag, when somebody says they got a bag of heroin, it's like 100 milligrams. And let's say you have bundles, people will use 1 or 2 bundles, so that's 10 bags a bundle. And the heroin now is $5. It's pretty cheap. So my patients, when they come to see me, they're usually on 5, 10, maybe 20 bags a day. It still adds up to a lot of money. So methadone and buprenorphine. Buprenorphine is the chemical name of Suboxone, and those are the 2 main treatments that are available for opioid use disorder. So methadone fully blocks the receptor, and buprenorphine partially blocks it. There's just some differences between the 2. The main thing is methadone, you have to go to a methadone clinic. The only methadone clinic around here is Riverhead. They're usually full. The patient has to go every day, and the results are as good as office-based treatment of buprenorphine, but it's not as convenient. The clinic is free. Most doctors who treat patients in their office with Suboxone, it's cash business. I take insurance. Methadone clinic is probably free, but if you can imagine, you're in Montauk and you have to drive to Riverhead every day until they really get to know you well, it's just not going to be very practical. They both have a very long half-life. Methadone a day and a half, buprenorphine. So that's what's nice. Heroin has a very short half-life, so people have to inject themselves many times a day with heroin to avoid going into withdrawal. Whereas Suboxone, you can take the stuff once a day or every 2 days. Methadone can be injected and abused. Suboxone, if you inject it, it's got something in it that prevents it from getting you high. Methadone is cheaper. Methadone people will take normally 40, 100 milligrams, but there is no maximum for methadone. Some people go to 300, 360. With buprenorphine or Suboxone, it's 4 tablets. More than that, it won't help you at all. So the nice thing about Suboxone is it is available very easily in the office. The physician has to do a 9-hour course online. Then I went to Columbia and I did a course there. It was mainly to have a backup, and I've offered to any physician to be free backup with questions, because when I began there was a nurse from Columbia who I must have called 60 times with questions on what to do. Because sometimes it's pretty frightening when somebody comes in withdrawal and they haven't been off the heroin long enough, and you give them the Suboxone and it pushes them into full withdrawal in your office, which is full of other patients. So first in the office, we'll get them on the medication, stabilize them, and most people are advised to stay on this indefinitely because of the relapse. So here's the history of buprenorphine. Launched in 1995. In 2000 was when doctors were allowed to start treatment. The medication was launched in 2003, and doctors in 2003 were limited to 30 patients. So it was a very lucrative business for physicians because they would have very needy patients who they would charge a handsome fee for to get them onto Suboxone, and then some would say, which I feel is unethical, now you've got to get off it, and I'm going to make a spot for another patient, but we know that the relapse rate is so high. So they increased the cap to 100 people in 2007, and last year to 275, and I'm the first doctor, I was told, on Long Island who has the cap. I have about 140 patients. So the first pill was called Suboxone. It's a film. It tastes absolutely horrible, very bitter. And then a menthol flavored one called Zubsolv came out, tastes a little better. And then you might have heard of Butrans. That's a Suboxone in a lower dose that's okay for pain, not for addiction, much lower dose. Then there's a film, Bunavail, and I even train to implant rods that have to be replaced every 6 months. It's buprenorphine. It's about $5,000. The rods have to be removed and replaced every 6 months, and it's for people that are only on one pill a day. So for me, the rods would be for somebody who's unpredictable, unstable, non-compliant, and unfortunately, the rods are for people who are on minimal dose and have to be compliant. And this year, a big change. Nurse practitioners and physician assistants can treat opioid addiction, but their supervising physician has to be licensed to treat opioid addiction. So at my talk at Stony Brook, there were about 50 in the audience, and I wore a tie, got a haircut, and at the end of the talk I said, who here will add opioid use disorder to their office practice? And only 2 people raised their hand, and they were both black nurse practitioners. So maybe in a year the others will come around like I did, because it's a real change for a doctor to think he's going to have addicts coming to his office, because you think of the worst, but it's not like that. It's not. Okay, so methadone, well researched, very limited number of methadone clinics. I actually have one patient on methadone for chronic pain. It is authorized for chronic pain. The big problem with methadone is it's really a very dangerous drug, because with just a little bit extra methadone, you could suppress the respiration. Why my patient and others will use methadone for pain, it's a lot cheaper than OxyContin. It's a lot cheaper than the fentanyl patches, Duragesic patches. But it's not a popular medication. So higher doses really can kill you. So methadone, harder to withdraw with methadone. If somebody has a lot of pain, methadone will be a better product for them than Suboxone, because you can go with higher doses of methadone. You can mix other opioids with methadone, it will block it somewhat. If you take other opioids with Suboxone, completely blocks it. You don't get high at all. So there's more of an abuse potential, overdose potential with methadone. Both are sold on the street. I have no control over my patients who might go out. They might tell me they need 3 tablets or films a day, and maybe they're taking just 1 and selling the other 2 on the street. That is one of the problems. In the methadone clinic, they watch the patient get the methadone usually, and they can't walk out on the street with it. So one thing we have for that is we have a 24-hour callback. The patient has to be reachable. They have to bring the pills in for a count. In other families, we managed to find somebody to hold the films and make sure that the kid takes it, because he can divert it. On the other hand, if it's diverted to the street and they're selling it to somebody who's an addict, I'd rather the person buy Suboxone than another heroin. In fact, most of my patients now have all had Suboxone from the street by the time they come to see me, which makes it a lot easier for me to start the medication. If you are opioid naive, the New York Times talked about a 19-year-old a few years ago, and he took 2 Suboxones recreationally and he died. So it is strong medicine, but it generally won't kill somebody who's already using opioids. That's one of the reasons they don't want it on the street. Side effects, basically none. The horrible taste. People will like to wash it down right afterwards, but you're really not supposed to eat or drink or smoke for 15 minutes because it's all absorbed in the mouth. So you can get a white reaction and hepatitis, but it's quite safe. Legal issues, this may be something that's putting off doctors. The DEA does come to visit your office. They've been to see me twice. We know what we're doing. They said they use me as a reference person. So most doctors aren't happy about the DEA coming into their office unannounced. So just another reason for doctors to not want to get involved in this. The patient's supposed to have access to counseling services, the informed consent. You know who this is? Why is his picture up there? Right? Died of an overdose of heroin. Okay. So we have patient treatment contracts, and this is something you could have if you have somebody living with you who has a history of opioid use. Just try to depersonalize it and make a written contract with your son or daughter. Something to set the ground rules clearly, something that needs to be reviewed periodically because they all forget what was written. It depersonalizes it. You can't take the addicted person's statements, lies personally. It's like you're a minister. You don't take it personally. You get pretty angry. And that was one of the hardest things for me when I started this 10 years ago. It was inconceivable that patients would lie to me, a physician. But when you think, well, we ask a diabetic, are you following your diet? And they all say, absolutely. So, but to somebody to lie about, injecting heroin, but they do. So many doctors are very uncomfortable with that, and I understand. So these are all treatment contracts that you could set up with somebody in your life. Same idea, behavior. Medications must be stored securely. If somebody has a spare Suboxone in their car, what will happen is they'll be arrested because they'll be felt by the cop to be a dealer. It has to be in the original container. And very important, if you're having someone in your family, it's reasonable to say, I want to do a random urine on you. Because the lies, I have so many patients tell me, yeah, everything's going great, fine. I say, we'll test you on the way to the bathroom. They'll say, oh, I did stuff. We don't fire them for that. My goal is to keep my patients alive and out of jail. So that's all the same old, same old. If somebody wants to taper off Suboxone, you can just cut back by about a half of a tablet or a film every 3 days. Poppy seeds will show positive on a drug screen. So the cutoff for that is a little higher than what the screen companies say. Okay. Keep it out of the reach of children. There was a mother in Long Island who let her child play with her Suboxone container, and the child got it and died. Okay. There are plenty of deaths now, people mixing Suboxone and benzos. Benzos is Xanax, Valium, Librium. But alone, Suboxone and these other products are very safe. How are we in time? No. Complicating issues. Many patients who see me have other issues that you gotta deal with. ADD is a big one. If you don't treat the ADD, attention deficit disorder, they're not gonna keep their appointments. They're gonna fall off the wagon. A hint that somebody has had ADD is their use of cocaine. Cocaine is similar to ADD medication. So many of my patients use cocaine to function normally. And that's a hint that maybe they have ADD and they could be on Adderall or Ritalin. Patients with bipolar disorder. I don't ask patients anymore, do you use cocaine? I say, when did you last use cocaine? It's that common, and almost all of them have used cocaine. And they've all used pot. So you wouldn't ask your son, do you use pot? Anxiety, depression, huge amount of anxiety, lots of people on benzos. Bounce checks, stolen pads, we've had that. We've had to call the police about once or twice a year for people that are impaired and want to drive away. So, and he's another one, right? Chris Farley died from overdose of heroin and cocaine. So what's that mix called? Speedball, right? Why do they mix heroin and cocaine? Heroin sedates you. Cocaine keeps you awake. So one of my patients tested positive for cocaine and heroin, and he insisted he doesn't take cocaine. So I asked another one of my patients to explain it, and he said, oh, he was getting heroin with cocaine. Well, he probably knew it, but basics for new patients. The way we do it, I pre-screen each patient by phone. We always ask for old records. Not the standard. One of my patients left, and I was accepting her insurance, and she went and saw 4 or 5 different physicians over 2 months. Not one of them called me, not one of them asked for my records, none of them asked my OCD, you know, like a real exam, real job. We don't even know if they checked the iStop, because had they checked the iStop, they would have seen, you know, page after page of entry from me, because I would be prescribing the patient only 2-3 days at a time, because she was always overtaking. So they would prescribe her a month at a time, she'd overtake it, come back, and they'd just fill it again. And she was paying cash for this. So the standard really should be getting old records, and why is the patient changing to you? If your relative is changing doctors frequently, that's a red flag. Make a treatment contract, urine screen. I had a patient that insisted the urine screen would be normal, yet everybody suspected he was taking. And I promised, and it was always normal. Well, he knew something that I at that time did not know, and that many doctors don't know, and that is that oxycodone is a synthetic drug. Doesn't show up on the regular drug screen. You have to have a drug screen with the oxy. Anyway, we learned over the years. These are professional patients. They're websites where they learn how to scam you. So if somebody's on Suboxone and it blocks other opioids, what do they do if they end up with a broken arm? They can't take more than 4 Suboxones. So, well, at that time, we might go with the benzos for relaxation, the nerve block, ketamine is used. But they won't be able to get much benefit from opioids unless it's a very high dose. So that's an issue. I want all my patients to have Narcan. You can purchase Narcan, maybe about $80 for 1 dose. The 2 packs are like $150. Insurance plans are paying for it. It's so simple to use. You just, the person that is not responding, you just squirt it in their nostril, and a couple minutes later, squirt it in the other nostril. You want to call the ambulance because the Narcan might last half an hour, whereas the opioids might be lasting hours. So they'll go back into unconsciousness. So that's available now over the counter. you have insurance, they'll pay for it. So that's something we've done on everybody this year. So a very popular method that's used at ELI, which insurance plans pay for, it's called a rapid detox. It does work, and the patient will go out on no Suboxone for maybe a couple days worth and told to find somebody. That works in the ideal situation. 90% or more people relapse within the month. Then they'll be back for another admission. They'll have trouble finding a Suboxone doctor. I send people to ELI as my backup when they're not working successfully with me. It's one of my backups. But I do not recommend that as a first approach. Thousands of dollars when you can just come in and get Suboxone in the office. Then some people might say, actually many people came to see me and they said, I want to be on Suboxone to help me get off heroin, but I want to be on it just a week. To date, not one person is stuck with that. Once they're on Suboxone, they are happy, they have their life back, they're not drugged, and they stay on it. But I say, sure, if that's what you'd like to do, we'll offer that. Okay. And then if they fail ELI and they fail Dr. Fein, then what's available? The highest level of care I have here is my office plus intense counseling as is offered at Alternatives here in town. They're in Riverhead, and they'll see the patient 5 afternoons a week. But if they fail that, what else can you do? Then it's long-term, very expensive inpatient. Has results, but again, some people just can't keep it together. And as they progress up the scale and inject heroin, and the normal course of the disease is to end in death. Did I tell you about in Pennsylvania last week? There was a halfway house, and there were 2 dead adults found in the halfway house. Did you read about this?
No.
And they were both drug counselors. The drug counselors running the halfway house overdosed. I think it was fentanyl. And have you heard of carfentanil? Carfentanil is the one that's 50 to 100 times stronger than fentanyl, known as animal tranquilizer. Was synthesized legally in China up to a couple months ago. A milligram of that will kill you. So I'm not a fan of rapid detox. The statistics just don't support it. If you want your son to try it, there's a 5% chance it'll work. But if they relapse, will be to relapse to death or arrest. But insurance plans do cover it. CFIL does it. Not that CFIL will do the detox. So induction, we don't like people driving to the office. They have to be at least 12, 24 hours off the opioids. And one person lied to me and had taken heroin a couple hours before coming to see me because they were afraid that the Suboxone wouldn't work, but didn't tell me. And it was the titration from hell, because I triggered a full-blown immediate withdrawal and had to give lots more Suboxone while he's pacing the office. But he told me he wouldn't have done it any other way. And other people have come in incomplete withdrawal, and they told me that they would not have waited to come in more withdrawal because it was so painful for them to come in and even part withdrawal. We believe that most people who are using the opioids from the street are no longer using them to get high, they're using them to avoid the withdrawal. And they have to work, these are working people. So they get very desperate. So the drug dealer may not have anything but heroin and not Percocets anymore. And the heroin's cheaper. So they say, no problem, just sniff it. They start sniffing it. And then it's not long after they're injecting it. One thing I didn't mention is how people become opioid use. About a third of my patients got it through physicians. They broke a bone and they were given opioids and it just became a long-term thing. The third did it recreationally, parties. And the third, and this is the real tragic kind, your son will get a job in construction or in a restaurant, and the work is very hard. The boss will want them to work extra hours, they'll be in pain, and someone will give them a Percocet to help them get through the hard job. Part of the cost of doing work, and they become addicted. That's totally tragic. And the person is afraid if they don't work extra time, they'll be replaced by somebody else, or they want the overtime. So that's really sad when I see that. Clonidine helps with the diarrhea and the aches when somebody comes in withdrawal. And Xanax is alprazolam, sometimes they'll give them that for a day or two. If people are on methadone, they have to really be 30 milligrams or less in a good 24 hours afterwards, or they'll have a bad experience going on Suboxone. The urine screening, we talked about that. You know, Actic Lollipop, Duragesic, fentanyl patches, that's a special test. You know, you've heard of the Duragesic patch. So I heard they're selling for about $80 on the street, used, because most of the medication's still in the patch. And the person will dissolve the remaining medication in boiling water and inject it, or they'll suck on the patch. So the doctors are more now asking patients to return the used patches. If you know somebody who has Duragesic patches, we don't want you now throwing it in the garbage. Who would imagine? So, this guy, John Belushi, right? He's another heroin and cocaine, 33. More people are actually dying from cigarettes and alcohol than opioids, keeping in perspective. But I think it's the shock of young people suddenly losing their life. This week, a fellow came in and he said he's buying his first house that would not have been possible if he had not been coming in for Suboxone. And I said, you know anybody who's died from this? And he said his best friend 10 years ago was riding in a car with his grandma up to Albany, and she thought he was napping. Nobody knew he had an opioid problem, and he overdosed and died in the car. So it's that shock. It's the look at the news a few months ago in East Hampton. There was one of that party house, and this kid was 12 hours unresponsive. Nobody called for help. Nobody gave Narcan, and that's in East Hampton. So there's an immediate shock that is making the opioid issue really serious, but more people are dying from cigarettes. From my perspective as a physician, I can't think of much else that I do that has such an immediate impact on my patients. If you see them coming in on day one in withdrawal and over the next week, and they become a totally normal person again. They're not getting high in Suboxone, they get their life back. It's not abused. The AA does not like Suboxone. They want people, NA. They don't like people on Suboxone. They want them free. Well, it's not a drug of abuse, it's like an insurance drug. You understand what I'm saying? The NA meetings, they don't want people on methadone or Suboxone. They want people off. That's politically correct, but doesn't serve the patient's long-term goals well. I'm going to talk shortly about the medication Vivitrol, which I feel should meet the NA's politics. So informed consent, we can treat minors. I'll skip over this. Pregnancy, I've had a few patients now with buprenorphine, it's fine. It's an easier withdrawal for the baby. than if they were on methadone, or certainly much easier than if they were on heroin. There are lots of babies now that are born to addicted moms. So, as a parent and as a doctor, you have to be prepared to say goodbye and end the relationship. You know, there's a book called Tough Love. You're going to have some recipe, because certain bad relations just keep going in families, and the child destroys everything. So this is a true patient that I had. My staff had given me many warnings that he was not doing well, and he was conning me and getting early refills, and but he was a nice guy, and I was fooled. So finally, I said, no, you've got to get a higher level of care. And so he texted me. These are some of the things they use on me, but they use it on their parents. I can't find anybody else to help me out of this jam. I'm pleading you. I'm pleading. You're a good guy. As a father and a person who's been on the right path, I want to go back to my old ways. We think he was selling the drug that I was giving. So, can you help me? We've already had phone calls on this, so here's my answer. I was ready for it. Try ELI. My office is not an option for you, as we already discussed, or try Dr. So-and-so. I tried everyone and everything that could be done. This is the only reason. I'm begging you. You've heard that before? My answer. ELI is set up for such situations. I'm not mad, you know. Go to ELI or this or that. Okay, thank you for the advice, and be well. So, this guy, the show Glee, Corey Monteith, he died from alcohol and opioids in a Vancouver hotel on a Saturday night. Ever see this guy on TV? So talented. 31. That was a few years ago. So they stopped the show Glee for a little bit, the restart. So here's the one that would have saved Corey Monteith's life, and it's called Vivitrol. It's a long-acting form of Narcan, and it's called naltrexone, and Narcan is called naloxone. So it was approved for alcohol use in 2006 and opioids in 2010. The shots are about $1,200. Insurance plans pay for it. When I first heard this medication, I had no interest for it whatsoever. I thought, who the heck would want a shot in their butt every month? And I did on a couple patients. The shot was painful. So the rep, I don't know if it's your product, so the rep told me you got to take it out of the fridge for an hour before. And so I started doing it again, and these big tough guys convinced me to offer it. They loved it. They said it empowers them. They have no craving for the opioids or alcohol. So now I have about 8 patients on that. And it's politically correct. It is not a drug that does anything but stop alcohol and opioids from getting you high, and also cuts back the craving. So it's not a drug. So it's also available as a pill. The pills didn't prove to be as effective because patients would simply stop the pill, knowing they're going to party on Saturday night. See, with Suboxone, and you're partying Saturday night, you got to stop the Suboxone maybe Wednesday. Vivitrol, you have to stop it a month before. You understand? So if somebody's going on a trip and they'll be back in 5 weeks, I'll give them the Vivitrol shot, and I'll give them a week of the pills to get them through. So that's where the pills are useful. And the shots are generally not hurting my patients because we warm it up. The future, maybe an implant for naltrexone. This would be a great one, competitive insurance coverage. Plans just are not making it financially exciting for patients to add these complicated patients to your practice. So I'm one of very, very few physicians that accepts insurance. And that's because I'm part of Stony Brook and they negotiated fair rates. But in general, patients will pay $100, $200, $250 a month. The initial visit might be $400 or $500. I'm very upset that you have to have a special license to treat opioid addiction, opioid use disorder. Physicians can prescribe all the Percocet, all the Duragesic they want. There's no restriction. But if you want to start treating the complications of those bad outcomes, you have to take a special course. It was an interesting course. I think it was about $300. And then you're limited to 30 patients. You're limited. No other drug limits the number of patients. It's way safer. Suboxone's way safer than Percocet. So why are they limiting it? Why are we making it something special? Every doctor who can prescribe Percocet should be able to prescribe Suboxone. It's easy. The hard thing is changing the paradigm. That the addict is someone you don't want in your office. The addict is trouble. This is what we have to change. But there should be no roadblock to doctors wanting to prescribe. And the DA coming into your office, that's a turnoff for a lot of doctors. And just getting better. One of the things that we're slowly realizing is that people who go into jail in New York and they go into a forced detox and they're released, they have a 3 times likelihood of dying in the next few weeks because they've lost their tolerance to the drug. So they go back and they buy heroin and they die because they've been cleaned. So the standard should be that they're sent out either a Vivitrol shot or Suboxone or methadone, something. Unfortunately, when prisoners go into jail, the Suboxone is not handled like somebody's insulin or their heart pills. More often than not, the patient is put into chemical torture. They're put into withdrawal. If somebody's a heroin addict and they go into jail, they're not necessarily going to get treated with methadone or Suboxone. Certainly not if they go in at a weekend. So the patient hasn't even been found guilty of anything, and they suffer a horrible experience. I think that is it. Hey, just under an hour. Okay.
Yeah, good.
There you go. References. If anybody wants this, just email me, allenfein@hotmail.com, and I'll be happy to share this. There's a lot of good information out there. It's a shame that people who are buying drugs on the street don't know their insurance could cover Suboxone or Vivitrol. When we have patients call for an appointment, besides speaking to them, and they want an appointment next week, we don't do that. We don't offer any appointments except the next day, maybe 2 days. And why is that? Because over half of the people that we would give appointments to 3 days later wouldn't show up. Because their attention span is immediate. And if they have money and access to drugs, they're going to go get it. When they're calling me, it's a bad day and they want to start treatment. So that's the other aspect of why my office is doing a good job. Most patients tell me the other doctors never call them up, but we realize they need immediate